everyone, I'm Katie. It's a joy to be speaking this morning as we carry on our series looking at Genesis, the life of Abraham. We're going to be reading Genesis 16 this morning, so if you want to find that in your Bible on your phone now. I don't know about you, I am really enjoying this series so far. I feel like I've learned so much already. We've learned about God's faithfulness, even when we are not faithful. We've learned about his promises of the land and the seed for his people. We've seen last week how even when he makes a covenant, he fulfills that covenant on our behalf. We've learned so much already, I feel, and today's passage, we're just going to be building and building on those themes that we've seen already. So, if you've missed any of those, I suggest you catch up on our podcast, only because it's been so good, on our podcast on Spotify, or thanks to Simon's technological efforts, on YouTube now as well. So whatever makes it easier for you to listen along. In particular, today we're going to be building on Phil's lovely talk from a couple of weeks ago, which served us so well, which showed us this theme of what happens when we see what is good in our own eyes and we take it for ourselves. That's going to come up a lot today. So today's a little bit like, it's not like spot the difference, but it's like spot the something. It's like spot the Adam and Eve. Okay, that's what it's like. Where's Wally? But it's where's Adam and Eve? That's what it is. So that's what I want us to do as we are reading this specifically as well in the first half. There's a lot of stuff in the first half which we're going to look at first. All about that Genesis 3 story of Adam and Eve. And the fall. Okay, so we're going to start by reading that first part, verses 1 to 6 of Genesis 16. Okay, starts like this. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, "Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go in to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarai, "Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please." Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. Let's just pause there then. That's like part one, kind of 3 of our story. So it begins by saying, Sarai had borne Abram no children. So straight away we need to be thinking, right, so out of those promises about land and seed, we're talking about seed, we're talking about offspring. That's what this is going to be about. Remember what God has promised to Abram, that his offspring will outnumber the stars, will become a great nation to bless all nations. And we saw last week, Abram does believe that. He just doesn't know how it's supposed to happen. So he has a complaint. It's all right. It's a good complaint. He has a complaint to God. He kind of thought maybe it's about Lot, his nephew, but then that got ruled out. So time's going on, and him and Sarai are only getting older. And now we've heard it's been 10 more years. 10 more years of waiting and longing and wondering and nothing. So you could see where the doubt starts to creep in. Is this really going to happen? Did God really say? So Sarai makes a plan. And just to say, she is not the first person to think of this plan. Culturally, this practice did happen. That is not to say that it is good or a good plan or what God is asking them to do, but she's not the first person to invent polygamy. In the culture at the time, this is what happened. So they are seeing this as an option for them. It's not like illegal in their culture. But this is not what God's asked them to do. Okay, so you can see why they think maybe this is the route. We'll see how that goes. So her plan is she's got this maidservant called Hagar. She takes Hagar and gives her to Abram. Can we see there a bit of our Adam and Eve? Eve takes the fruit and gives to Adam. Sarai takes Hagar and gives to Abram. And notice at this point we don't hear from Hagar at all. She has no voice. She has no agency. She is treated as property Sarah's servant to be taken and given. How will other people decide? And at this point, Sarai's sin is quite subtle because it looks like she's going in the same direction as what God has said and what he's promised. He's promised offspring. This is a plan to bring about offspring. She's not like running the complete opposite direction and said no. She's heard the promise, she likes the sound of it, but she's got bored of waiting or tired of waiting or it's too painful to wait anymore. And so she's going to make it happen. But listen very carefully to what she says and try and understand how her motivations have got all mixed up. She's saying, the Lord has prevented me. And she's saying, sleep with Hagar so that I might obtain children. You could read it as so that I might be built up. So everything's got a little bit twisted around. God's promise, it's there, kind of, but it's got twisted. She wants, in her pain and her emptiness and her desperation, she wants what God's promised, but she wants it on her terms, she wants it in her timing, she wants it to benefit her. So it's subtle. And we've said already, maybe she looks a bit like Eve with the taking and the giving. But also, maybe here she looks like another, I would say person, but not really, character in our Genesis 3 story. Because it says, Abraham listened to the voice of Sarai. What does that make us think of in the Genesis 3 story of Adam and Eve? They listened to the voice of the serpent. So Sarai's now become, rather than one who is following God's voice and walking in his promise, she's now at odds with God. She's now become this voice of the serpent. And this is the oldest trick in the book, isn't it? The half-truth. And we can fall for it easily as well. Even with really good things. Oh, well, Jesus has promised us this. Jesus has spoken to about this. Jesus says we're going to plant churches all across the northeast. Better make it happen. Better start sending people. Better go, 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 go. Right? We can get really busy. And it can seem like it is for God. It can seem like it's for a good thing. And it can seem like it's following his promise. Maybe for you, God's spoken to you about a ministry or some kind of work that he wants you to do. Maybe he wants you to work with kids or with young people or with people who are homeless or whatever it is. He's given you this calling, he's given you this dream or this promise, and you just feel this pressure, or you've just been spent so long waiting. It's so tempting to start making stuff happen, isn't it? In our own wisdom and in our own strength. But we really need to be careful that we don't cut him out of the picture. We want the giver, don't we? We don't just want the gifts. We want the promise giver. We don't just want the things he's promised. Because we've seen already, and we'll see again, when we see what is good in our own eyes and we take it for ourselves, things do not go well. How does it turn out in this story for Sarai? Well, starts okay. Hagar does get pregnant, but then because she's pregnant and she's now a wife of Abraham, she starts to look down on Sarai. She has done what Sarai couldn't. Sarai must have been full of shame, must have felt empty, must have felt incomplete, must have felt so insecure. She's been unable to do what she's supposed to do. And that really doesn't match well with now Hagar, who's got a little bit smug, who's got proud. She's now disrespecting Sarai, because she should still respect. So it's this weird system, isn't it? And this is why this is not God's way. This is why this never goes well. She's supposed to still respect Sarai, but she's kind of getting above her station. So these two things don't mix well. Sarai's pain and insecurity and Hagar's pride. And it's causing this division. So then Sarai complains to Abraham, and she says, I gave my servant to your embrace, and then look what's happened. Now she's treating me like this. May the Lord judge between you and between me. So now they're divided as well, right? There's this tension between Sarai and Hagar. There's this tension between Abraham and Sarai. There's division everywhere. It's our Where's Wally game again, isn't it? It's Adam and Eve again, where they're hiding from God. And he says, did you eat the fruit? And Adam says, the woman you gave me, she, and Eve goes, well, the snake, it was he just tricked me. It's all this blame, passing the blame, not taking responsibility, division between people. This is where it gets us. When we see what is good in our own eyes, when we take it for ourselves, if we're left to our own devices, we just play out this story again and again and again on a loop. This is the fallen human condition. This is our story that we're kind of stuck with. This is the thing behind every family falling out, every domestic. We see and we take, we're divided, we blame each other. We see it every day in the news. Tax fraud and corporate greed and theft and violence and war. We see and we take. I was in Boots in Wallsend yesterday and I walked in and the entire makeup section was empty and I was like, oh, maybe they're restocking naively. Maybe they're restocking. And I went round the other aisle and half of that aisle's missing as well, and over in the corner the electricals and the baby stuff's all missing. And I asked the woman at the counter and she said it very matter-of-factly. Oh yeah, we had shoplifters in yesterday. You'd say, oh, we had the electrician in yesterday. She's just yeah, we had shoplifters in yesterday, so I don't know when things will be back in. This is what we do, we see and we take. And even we celebrate it. Sometimes we admire it. We tell young people the world is your oyster, it's yours for the taking. We look up to people who seem to have taken their opportunities. And they give out advice and they say, well, I didn't wait around, I made it happen. We call people go-getters. Our culture, it celebrates this. But it leads to division and it leads to pain. And that's what happens here. Sarai, Abraham says, well, look, your servant, you can do what you want. Sarai treats Hagar harshly and Hagar leaves. And that's part 1 of 3 of our story. So let's have a look now at part 2. So look at verse 7. It says, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur, and he said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? She said, I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai. So Hagar's left. She's run away. She's in the wilderness. She's probably going back home to Egypt. And what are her options at this point as a pregnant runaway slave? She probably has very few options. She probably does not have a large, wealthy, well-connected family just waiting for her in Egypt, longing to feed her and look after a baby. If she did have those options, she would not have ended up with Abraham and Sarai in the first place. She's probably going to need to try and find another mistress if anyone's going to take her on. But right now at this point, probably she just needs to survive, and she's by this spring. And it's a bit of a picture for her situation. She's in this harsh, unforgiving landscape, but there's about to be a glimmer of hope. This is where the angel of the Lord finds her. And notice that it is that way round. She is not looking. We don't know at this point what she understands of the Lord, but she is running away from his people who have mistreated her. But he finds her. And it's always that way around. Aren't we grateful that it's always that way around? Jesus always finds us wherever we are. In Psalm 139, it says that we can't flee from God's presence. If we rise on the wings of the dawn, if we settle on the far side of the sea, if we go up to the heavens or down to the depths, he is there and he finds us. And he finds Hagar here when she's fleeing. And it's worth saying, this angel of the Lord, people have different opinions about, is this an angel? Is this God? Is this the second person of the Trinity? Is this what they call a pre-incarnate Christ, before he became a baby and a man? Is this him? I don't think it's massively important. We're going to see Hagar's response to him. The words that he speaks are God's words, whether this is God's messenger or whether this is God in some form. In that time as well, if you saw a messenger of the king, it was as if you'd seen the king. He carried the authority of the king. He would have had some kind of royal emblem or symbol of the king. His words were treated as the words of the king. If you saw him, it's like, I've seen the king. So when we see these words to Hagar, these are God's words. So he finds her, this angel of the Lord, and what does he say to her? He says her name, and he asks her a question or two. So why is her name important? I'm a maths teacher, and at school, when we're doing the register, we say the kids' names, and they're supposed to say our names. So they're not just supposed to say yeah, or here, or yeah, miss. They're supposed to say, yes, Miss Pollard, or here, Miss Pollard, or morning, Miss Pollard, if they like you. You don't make them say it, but you can tell. But they're supposed to say your name, and you're supposed to say their name. And when you're having a conversation also with a student that's maybe a difficult conversation and things haven't been going well, it's really helpful to be able to use their name. Or if you walk into someone else's classroom to cover their lesson, the kids whose names you know, it's really, really helpful. The more kids' names you know, and you're encouraged as a teacher to immediately, once you begin, look at all your seating plans and learn all the names as fast as you can. Because things just go better when you're speaking to someone and you say, Cheryl, would you mind? Or Cheryl, could you just, if you're trying to get people to do what you need them to do, if you start with their name, things go better. Then like, oi, you know. So he starts with her name. This is the best way to start this conversation. Her name, incidentally, we're not, scholars aren't 100% sure, but maybe her name means flight. And so in saying her name, and he says, servant of Sarai, he's saying, I know you. He's saying, I know your story up until now. I've seen what's happened, I've seen. So then he asks her these questions. So it's kind of a contradictory thing. He's saying her name and he's saying, I know you and everything about you. And then he asks her, where are you coming from and where are you going? Well, you just said you know. Why does he do that? And what is it like? What is that like again? Because that's another one of our little where's Wally things. In the garden, when Adam and Eve are hiding from God, and he says, where are you? He said, who told you you were naked? Have you eaten that fruit from that tree? Why does he ask those questions? It's not for information, like he knows the answer. That's not it. It's not an interrogation. It's an invitation to a conversation. It's an invitation to share. It's an invitation to speak. It's an invitation to let him in. These questions tell us something of his character, of his patience, of his mercy, of his desire for a relationship with us. He's not an impersonal force just passing judgments on wrongs. He wants to speak with us. He wants to hear our voice. I hope that's your experience of God, that he's gentle, that he comes to you with questions. Sometimes the way we see God, it's mapped onto all kinds of experiences in our life, and we're always learning more and more what he's really like, and we learn it through his word and we learn it through each other. And I wonder whether it's worth thinking about, how do you hear God, and is his voice towards you kind and gentle and merciful with questions? Because that's how he deals with his people. So that's how he speaks to Hagar, and how does she respond? She does better than Adam and Eve, to be fair, to her credit. She's just honest, and she says, I'm running away from my mistress. That's the situation. So the angel gives her an instruction and a promise. And he tells her to return and submit to Sarai, which can't have been what she wanted to hear. Clearly, Sarai has treated her so severely, you could read it as humiliated her, to the point where she's fled alone into the wilderness. Going back would not have been what she wanted to do. And I do just want to pause here and say, I think it's easy to see how this instruction to this one woman in these very specific circumstances could be misunderstood or even deliberately and maliciously twisted. This instruction to Hagar is not a mandate to instruct all women fleeing harm to return and submit. That is not what this is. Perhaps you've left a situation, a job, a relationship, a house where you were, in fact, abused. Maybe you've been in a wilderness of your own with very few options in front of you. Maybe actually at the minute that's where you feel you are. Please do not hear these words as a blanket one-size-fits-all instruction to you. Please come and talk to Rick and Cheryl. They'll listen and pray with you and support you to find a way forward. And we've not got to it yet, we'll come on to it, but we'll see that Hagar has a God who sees her. In your wilderness, in your place that looks like there's very few options, you have a God who sees you and cares for you. So this is the angel's instruction to Hagar, and with it comes a promise, which starts off sounding very familiar to the promise that Abraham was given. And we don't know for sure, but probably, given that she's been in the household with them for many years, she's heard Hagar this promise. They would have talked about it. Maybe even they used it and sort of explained it and sat her down and said, look, this is why you're becoming a wife. This is the plan. So it must have grabbed her attention when the angel is telling her that her offspring, what does it say in verse 10? I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. Surely her ears have pricked up and she's thinking, is this it? This is the promise, the big promise, the promise we've all been talking about for years. Is this? And then he carries on in verse 12, and this might ring a few bells for us as well, not with our Adam and Eve story now, but if we know the Christmas story. He says, behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. And it happens other times throughout Scripture as well, where angels come to women and say, you're pregnant and you shall bear a son, and you shall call his name. And then that's all sounding good, especially to us, given that we've made that link in our head. But in verse 12, it sounds less good. It says, he shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. So that now sounds less like the thing that was said to Abraham, like the nation that will bless all nations. This sounds a bit different. So maybe it's not sounding the same. I don't know about you, but if I was told you're having a baby who'll grow up to be a wild donkey, I would not love that. It's like a really, really weird baby shower prediction. You know, people are like, I'm thinking like they're going to be born 2 days early, like 7 pound one, like wild donkey of a man. You'd be like, you're not coming back. Thank you. But Hagar does not respond to this with hesitation or with weirdness or with like, excuse me, that's rude. She responds to this really positively. So something in what is said here, we're missing it in translation. She responds and is like, what a beautiful, hopeful, excellent promise I've been given. So what does it actually mean to her? What is she hearing here that maybe we're missing? Like there is conflict there, definitely. But the image of this wild donkey, what she's hearing is freedom. As a slave, she's hearing, my son will not be a slave, he'll be free. The wild donkey, it goes where it wants, it does what it wants. That's what this is saying. Your son is going to be an independent person, able to go where he pleases, does what he pleases. Yes, there's conflict, it's not all rosy, but she's taking that and she's hearing that and she's delighted, actually, with that future for her son. Also, the fact that he is a son is so significant as well. So she's hearing this and she's delighted, and she responds, it says in verse 13, she responds with this beautiful and really significant moment. It says, so she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, you are a God of seeing. For she says, truly here I have seen him who looks after me. And therefore the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. Did you know this is the only time in the Bible where a human being chooses a name for God? That don't sound like it could be true, does it? Because there's so many names for God in the Bible, and so many people who say God's names, but all of the other times, God reveals his name to them. Like he speaks through his prophets, or he says, I am the I am, or he reveals his name, but here it says, she called the name of the Lord. And I just think this is absolutely incredible and marvelous and wonderful, because he chooses the least likely and conveys on us the greatest honors. This is a proud, pregnant Egyptian slave woman on the run, speaking to the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth, the Holy One, the Ancient of Days, Alpha and Omega. She says to him, I have seen the living God who sees me. That's who you are, the God of seeing. That's a really significant, beautiful, wonderful moment for this woman sat by this spring with very little ahead of her. So she thought. And this is a really stark contrast to Sarai. Remember, she wanted God's promise, but she's cut him out of the picture. She's not seeing God. She feels like he's not seeing her. This is the opposite. Hagar is looking to the promise giver. So there's two things going on here. She's saying, I have seen the Lord who sees me. So this makes us ask, what does it mean that we see the Lord? What does it mean that he sees us? What does it mean that we've seen the Lord? Throughout the Bible, people see God or glimpses of him, or we heard about the pillar of fire in the day and smoke. No, the other way around. Smoke and fire for the people in the wilderness. Moses, God asked him to hide, and he could just, when he walked by, just look at the back of him because he couldn't handle his glory. Isaiah sees these visions of God on the throne where even the angels are covering their faces. So God reveals himself lots of different ways throughout the word. And then when Jesus comes as a man, he's there to be seen all of the time. He's there to be seen as a baby. He's there to be seen as a child. He's there to be seen as a man, as a friend. The disciples saw his miracles. They saw him teach. They saw him heal. They saw him die. They saw him rise. Sometimes maybe I think, if you're anything like me, maybe you think, oh, wouldn't that have been good to have actually seen Jesus? Right there. But he has promised us that he's better, that he's gone, and that he's given us his Spirit. His Spirit who has opened our eyes to see him, to see his mercy towards us, our need of him, his grace, to see in his word where he is, where the gospel is running through the whole of Scripture, to see his miracles again now, to see his healing again now. We are people who have seen God because he has revealed himself to us. We can say, I have seen the one who sees me. So then what does that bit mean, to be seen by the Lord? Well, like Hagar, he knows our name and he knows our story up until this point. He knows where we've failed and where others have failed us. Going back to that psalm, he has numbered every hair on our heads. He knows when we sit and when we rise. He sees you when you're going about your day-to-day life, when you're answering your emails or making a cup of tea, if you're walking the dog, if you're up in the middle of the night because you can't sleep or the kids can't sleep. He sees. And I'm saying all that oh, nice, it's comforting. But actually, it's not enough just to see. Because we've said we see and we take, right? When we're left to our own devices, when we're living without God, when we're at our worst, we see and we take. So just because someone sees, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll do anything or that they'll do anything good. Just because someone sees a problem, it doesn't mean they'll fix it. Think about other sort of ideas or characters that we know. Think about Santa, right? Santa sees you when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake. He doesn't help you get on the nice list. He just says, I'm watching you. And then you have to work really hard to be nice, right? Or the idea of Big Brother and that we're being watched. That's not a positive thing, is it? That's any minute now you'd be bundled away into a van, put in room 101 with the rats if you've read it. Or if you like sorry about the Lord of the Rings things, but if you like Lord of the Rings, the big, evil, watching eye in the sky of Sauron. Don't want to be seen by that. So being seen on its own actually might be terrifying. So being oh yeah, he's the God who sees me when I'm making my cup of tea, actually might be, oh, he sees me and judging me. So seeing alone is not enough, because we see and we take. But Hagar says, truly I have seen him who looks after me. He is the Lord who looks after me. When the Lord sees, he has compassion. So when we see, we take. But when he sees, he gives. He sees Hagar in the wilderness and he gives her hope and he gives her a promise. And we see it the whole way through Scripture. Adam and Eve, he sees their nakedness and their shame and he gives them clothes. In the Exodus story, he sees his people oppressed in Egypt and he gives them a way out. He sees the people hungry and complaining in the desert and he gives them manna, bread from heaven and water from a rock. He sees the people lost and he gives his son. Jesus, when he's on earth, when he's teaching the crowds of people, he sees that they're like lost sheep and he gives him himself as his shepherd. He sees the sick and he gives them healing. He sees the blind and he gives them sight. He sees us in our sin and he gives us his righteousness. He sees our bondage and he gives us his freedom. He sees our insecurity, he gives us his assurance. He sees us as we are spiritual orphans and he gives us his sonship. He sees us in our weakness and he gives us his strength. He sees us in our death and he gives us his life. He sees you and he gives himself to you. He gave up his very life on the cross and now he freely gives you his Holy Spirit. We see and we take, but he sees and he gives. Isn't he good? I said at the beginning that the story of humanity is this broken, repetitive loop of us seeing and taking, and if we're left to our own devices, it's inevitable. We do that and it causes division and pain, but the good news is that our good God has written us a better story. We can now be like him because he's given us his forgiveness, because he's given us his life, because he's given us his spirit. We can be like him in his sonship. We can be children of God and we can see and we can give. So what does it look like for us as the River Church to be a people who see and who give? We want to see one another, and that takes effort and that takes time. It takes listening. We've just started up home groups. That's a really great place to do that, to know each other, to see each other, so that we experience being seen by one another and as God's ambassadors by him, and we can give to one another. We can share each other's burdens. We can give each other our time. And outwardly, we want to be a generous people as well. We've heard about our given away God, and we want to look just like him. So we want to see what our culture needs. We want to see what our neighbours need. We want to see and we want to respond and we want to give. That's something that we've got few options for how we can do that without a building. But I was talking, me and Maya were getting really excited actually about this in home group. As again, in home groups, that's something we can work on together. What do we want to do? Where do we want to be looking outwards? Where do we want to see a need and give? We're going to come back to that as we respond, but let's just wrap up our story because I said it was 3 parts. The last part, you'll be glad, is very brief. So the last part is just verses 15 and 16. It says, so she must have returned, it doesn't say, but it says, and Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. So she returns and she gives birth, and the boy is called Ishmael, God hears. And the story ends in the opposite way to how it began. Remember, it began and it said, Sarai had borne Abram no children. And it ends here saying, Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. So Sarai's planet did not work out well for her. She's just not even mentioned in the end. She wanted to gain and she wanted to be built up, but doesn't even get a mention. And we're going to pause here and we're going to carry on with the series next week. But they must have been wondering at this point, like we said before, is that promise the same promise? Is this it? Is he the offspring? Come back next week.